Hello and welcome everyone. I'm very grateful for you joining this Bright Talk session today. This session is a three-part series titled Confronting Cybersecurity Fears to Control Cyber Risks. This part one series is for the C-suite. So anyone in a C-suite position or anyone in charge or in ownership of cybersecurity, this is the session for yourself. This part one session is all about simplicity. I'm very conscious that you all have small amounts of time. So if you're listening in to me today while you're working, there's a couple of exercises I would like you to undertake. But once again, thank you so much for joining today's session. What to expect from this series? Today, the world of cybersecurity is evolving. And ultimately, from what I'm seeing is we've got one side of the business in going one direction, and there's an argument, say, the technology side of cybersecurity is going in another direction. More importantly, as an industry, we have this amazing ability to overcomplicate what I call cybersecurity. More importantly, as a business leader, can you truly show return on investment? Can you show effectiveness in your approach in cybersecurity? If you've answered no to any of those, this is the session I would like you to watch. I want to remove the fear in cybersecurity and allow organizations to execute a cybersecurity target operating model that creates effectiveness, but at the same time reduces risk to your organization. The session is broken down into three core parts. I'm going to focus on scene setting, the objectives, the why, and the what. Then we're going to move into what I call the foundations of cybersecurity, the bits that no one actually talks about. This is how you understand your current level of operating model, and you underpin your target operating model, the foundational elements for success in cybersecurity. Then finally, enablement for change. We're going to walk you through a very quick process and step to ensure you execute for success. But remember, this part one series is all about simplicity. The simplicity of the core foundations to drive effectiveness from your business. If you haven't already registered for part two, part three, I suggest you do that now. Part two is about elasticity, and part three is about tranquility. Register now, and I look forward to you attending those sessions. During this session, you can also submit any questions. These questions from me are really important. I want feedback. I want to hear about what you want to hear more about of. I want to hear if this message is on point and it's actually helping you. So if you could submit your questions within the Bright Talk platform, I would be very grateful. And in part two, I will answer any questions that you have, or I will also personally follow up in person to you as well. So let's just step back. From what I'm seeing around the world, it doesn't matter what size of an organization, big or small, large corporate, large global organization, I am seeing a massive breakdown in alignment of cybersecurity. We have the business requirements in one direction, we have technology in another direction, and we have processes that are not linking technology and the business requirements together for cybersecurity. The implications of this is we're seeing an increase in cost. The operating cost for cybersecurity continually increases. So ultimately, during this part one series, simplicity, we're going to address this problem and talk about it in more detail. In addition, in this breakdown in technology, business requirements, and processes, we've also got this huge loss in translation. Can you tell me, or can you clearly show me that everyone in your organization clearly understands what they're accountable for, responsible for, and measured against for cybersecurity. Again, in my experience of what I'm seeing around the world, very few organizations can actually clearly articulate the operating model around ownership, accountability, and measurement based on business function, stakeholders, or individuals. So we have this compound effect occurring. We have a misalignment between technology and business requirements, limited processes which are scalable and repeatable, and a loss in translation of who's doing what and who's responsible for cybersecurity. This problem increases the cost of maintaining, implementing cybersecurity, but at the same time, increases risk. From the data that I've seen and collated, I'm seeing this year-on-year increase in spend, and at the same time, a year-on-year increase in breaches. This is not to do with technology. The technology is there to solve this problem. This is a fundamental breakdown in how we architect cybersecurity within our business processes, within organizations. And as business leaders, CISOs, heads of security, we need to start thinking different. This fundamental breakdown in lack of direction, lack of ownership, combining business requirements to technology requirements linked to business processes, is creating 4 major challenges that I'm seeing within organizations. So the first one is, when you're starting something new, is cybersecurity considered default as part of that project? The second challenge and problem I'm seeing is performance problems. How many of you today can honestly tell me they can show the effectiveness around performance? Can you even measure effectiveness around performance for cybersecurity? The biggest frustration, and for me, the biggest and simplest problem from a simplicity point of view that we can solve, is alignment between business functions. Doesn't matter what organization I go into, doesn't matter what industry, I'm consistently seeing misalignment between the cybersecurity team and other business functions. So let's just think about this. You could be running a very simple element of cybersecurity. You could be running vulnerability management. However, for the vulnerability management team to be successful, they're relying on other business functions to undertake the remediation, to solve the problem. Unless that operating model, KPIs measurement, accountability has been set up, or in a simple term, a RACI around vulnerability management is present, you're not going to get alignment between those business functions. And then finally, the ability to implement a cybersecurity strategy. How do you execute? Again, a common problem. I consistently see strategies on paper, but actually to see it as part of the business process, to see the execution, to see the outcome, it's just not happening. And this is what we're going to address today. These are simple problems, simple challenges that we can solve right now that have an immediate effect on how we approach cybersecurity, make cybersecurity part of the business process, reduce operating costs, but at the same time, reduce risk to your business. The consequence of these issues that I've identified is really, really simple. The threat actors are winning the game. They're winning the match. From a business perspective, you may have technology. You may have invested in technology. Is that technology operationalized properly? Is it effective? Does it consist of the right scope? Are you measuring the right things? What is the cost of maintaining it? Are you utilizing the functionality, the features? Are you getting the business value from it as opposed to the technology or the geekiness? Every organization I go and talk to, the threat team is actually winning. So from a business perspective, we need to address this. For you to start approaching cybersecurity in a slightly different way and asking the hard questions to yourself, to your business, and to your broader stakeholders. So let's reset. We need to understand your current operator model. For me, this is the what and the how. Before we can actually start addressing the operating model or making things simple to execute for outcomes within your organization, we need to understand what are you doing wrong right now. And to do that, I'm going to hopefully do a live exercise and interact with you here. But if you're listening while you're working, if you can just take 5 minutes out, I would be super grateful. So for everyone listening, if you can just go and get a blank piece of paper, a pencil or a pen, and if you can draw this X and Y axis, I would be very, very grateful. So what we're going to do very quickly is we're going to identify if you have a challenge or if you have a problem right now in the ability to operationalize cybersecurity. And what we're going to do here is I want you to start mapping out various elements of what I call the Rapid7 Horizon model. So what I need you to do right now, and if we can do this while we're live here, like so, I want you to write on a piece of paper right now KPIs. So as you can see, I've typed KPIs here like so. I require you to position the KPI in the following position. So what we have here, we have invisible to visible. Obviously invisible, it's invisible in the business, to visible. If it's very visible, that tells me, and it's based on the board or stakeholder level, actually map, track the measurement of KPIs in your organization. So that's the visibility. And then we have evolution along the bottom. So we have genesis, i.e. it's a fault. It's not actually done. It's custom, it's done sometimes. It's repeatable, it's consistently done. And it's adaptive. We continually do it, but we continually evolve it, adapt it as the business changes. So again, if you can just on your sheet of paper, take KPI and map it in the appropriate position. Based on the theoretical company I'm talking about, I'm going to say it's here, it's custom and it's invisible. Sometimes the security team, the CISO use KPIs, but it's not repeatable. So we're going to put it here. Now, again, don't get too detailed on this. And again, as a cybersecurity community, we're really good at getting into the details opposed to zooming out. I want everyone to zoom out. So KPI, map it on your piece of paper. The next one I want you to do is scope. Same process applies. So we just create scope. What is the scope of cybersecurity? Let me explain what I mean by scope. Do you clearly define by business function the level of risk you're trying to mitigate? So again, zoom out. So what is the scope of cybersecurity? Is it clearly defined within your organization? Or is it just the whole organization? Do you define it by components, by business function, by data type? Again, same process applies here. Is that invisible or is it invisible? So again, I'm going to put this here. It's custom and it's kind of slightly visible, but not too visible. The next one I want you to create is risk. So again, on your piece of paper, if you can all write in risk, like so. What is the level of risk in your organization? If I was to say, could you tell me the exact level of risk for a particular business function? Could you do that? Yes or no? And also, how visible is that within the organization? So is it only visible to the security team or to the IT team? Or is it visible to the whole organization or stakeholders? So again, if you can plot the level of invisible to visible, and then is this repeated? Or is it custom, or is it not novel? So in this case, I'm going to put it roughly here. So kind of risk is kind of visible, but not quite. And it's genesis. Sometimes we tell the business or different parts of the business, but actually it's not a repeatable process. It's not part of the business process. Now, the next one and the final one is a concept of protection level agreements. Do you have clearly defined protection level agreements within your organization? So if you've never heard of the term protection level agreements, I'll provide content and material on this later. However, a protection level agreement is a defined form of SLA between the stakeholders in the organization, as high as you can get, for example, the board, which measures the broader business on cybersecurity. So a really good example of a protection level agreement would be critical vulnerabilities. Critical vulnerabilities, the protection level agreement would state for critical vulnerabilities, we require mean time to remediation within a set period of time. That's what's measured by the stakeholders in the organization. But the key point here, because we may have people saying, oh, we have that. Do you do it by scope? Do you do it by cloud, business function, etc.? So again, I require you to plot the level of maturity for protection level agreements. How visible are they are in the organization, and the level of evolution. So we're just going to use this as an example. Now, what I require you to do, now we have these, is start mapping these together very quickly. So start drawing lines. The reason for the lines is they all have relationships. They're all intertwined. So the scope is based on risk, the scope is based on a KPI, and they all have relevance. They're all anchored to each other. Without one or the other, or if you've got one that's less mature than the other, you're not going to get effectiveness. And this concept of what I'm doing here is a concept of Wardley mapping. Another conversation, I suggest you look at Wardley mapping. But what this allows us to do very quickly is to identify the level of maturity. So what we've created here is a map. The beauty of this map, as opposed to a SWOT, it's three-dimensional. You can see the relationships between different elements and different components. You can see the level of maturity, the level of evolution. So you've got this 360 view of your current operating model at a very strategic level. So what I've plotted here is a typical example of an organization that I see. So what you're seeing in the not so highlighted, the grayed out area, is what I normally see in most organizations. They have no protection level agreements agreed, established with the board. KPIs, key performance indicators around cybersecurity. They're kind of risk informed, custom. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Not quite visible, maybe visible just to the security team. Scope is slightly up, slightly more visible, because in most cases, organizations say, right, the scope is the business. We look at vulnerabilities across the business. Unfortunately, as business leaders, you will realize that actually different organizations are in transformation. You have some in cloud, some on-prem, some in a third party. We need to look at the scope based on the business function or the location or the infrastructure or the cloud environment. And then we kind of bring in the current level of risk. The risk posed in the cloud is different to the risk potentially internally. So what you're seeing here is a typical scenario. The objective of where I need everyone to head to is the stuff in the non-highlighted elements here. I need you to create an anchor on return on investment, which is underpinned by protection level agreements. Protection level agreements are supported by what I call the level of risk, defined by the scope, underpinned by KPIs. My point here is we need to start using data from the technology and translate that into business conversations. That data then allows us to make an informed decision. More importantly, as business leaders, you can look at that data to identify the effectiveness of your approach to cybersecurity very, very quickly. Now, if you want to hear more about this, I'll point you in the right direction at the end of this session. So now we have a brief understanding of your level of, or your current operating model. I need to talk about culture. For me, culture is a fascinating subject. And for any of you that's been involved in any successful organization, there's two core reasons why that organization was successful. First of all, there was a North Star. Everyone knew what direction they were pointing in. Everyone was pointing to the same North Star, the same goal, the same objective. That North Star was underpinned by a culture. The culture was led by the leadership, tracked by performance. The fundamental basics were done around the culture, allowing people to have the flexibility, but working to a constraint that was required within operating guidelines, which achieved the appropriate outcomes. They strive to be the best. They stay within the organization, and they say things when they see things going wrong. This in turn delivered the business outcomes, the talent, the operating model, happy customers, happy P&L. So I need to challenge you right now. What is your level of culture around cybersecurity? One question I'm going to ask everyone here right now is HR involved in cybersecurity? Do they own any element of cybersecurity? If you answer no, you have a problem with cyber culture. Again, I will direct you at the end of this session how to start addressing cybersecurity culture. Also, we need to look at the management of culture. For cybersecurity, it's very unique. It's one of very few subject matters that touch every single part of an organization. We've got the hard elements, we've got the soft elements. We need to ensure that every single individual in an organization is pointing in the same direction, and they clearly understand what is required from them for cybersecurity. Again, very few organizations that I see, this isn't communicated. Cybersecurity there is a silo. They're the no-men. As leaders in cybersecurity, we need to evolve. Traditionally, we started out as being guards, but we need to become leaders. To become leaders and to transform your organization, we need to take them on a journey. And this is around the culture and the needs and the management of cybersecurity. There needs to be structure. There needs to be a strategy. There needs to be clearly defined processes and systems in place. Without this, your cybersecurity operating model will fail. And for me, it's really simple. If we don't have the right level of culture, measurement, accountability, and process, we're going to cause reactions. We're not going to get the effectiveness. So depending on your journey for cybersecurity, your level of maturity, this is baby steps. It's all about outcomes. It's a journey over time. So first of all, we need to ensure we've got the right level of culture. The level of culture for an engineering team and what they need to focus on is different to the culture and product management or the development team. So we need to clearly understand the level of culture for different business functions and different individuals or personas within the organization. In turn, we need to measure effectiveness in a different way as well, depending on the stakeholders or the audience within the organization. We need to clearly communicate the accountability. Who's accountable for what? Cybersecurity is not a security team problem. It's a whole organization. So unless we clearly articulate, explain who's accountable for what for cybersecurity, you're not going to get effectiveness. Going back to my previous example, cybersecurity team identify a vulnerability, a threat, or a risk. They're reliant on other parts of the organization to mitigate that risk, eradicate it, or transfer the risk. But that can only be done if that other business function or individual are aware and measured and are accountable for solving that problem within a particular time. And then we come down to process. Can you clearly define all of the different processes for cybersecurity? You all have technology. Are you utilizing the functionality and the technology to automate some of these processes? My gut tells me no. Most organizations, generally with technology, are using between 10 and 20% of the functionality. We're in a world of technology. We should be utilizing automation, using the automation to streamline the measurement, the accountability, which in turn feeds into the culture. Or more importantly, you can use measurement to gradually evolve the level of culture. So going back to simplicity for cybersecurity, we need to look at the culture. If you don't have a culture for cybersecurity, or if you're struggling to think about the culture or the effectiveness, again, I will provide you content on how to address that. We need measurement. If we start measuring, and I'm sure most of you at a very technical level today are identifying and detecting risks and vulnerabilities, we need to use that data, translate it into a business conversation or business data to drive the level of maturity for a culture. Once we have measurement, we have culture, we can start applying levels of accountability. I'm sure a lot of you on these calls today have heard of OKRs. Why don't you start putting cybersecurity OKRs across your organization? But I don't need you to focus on process or resources or automation until you've addressed the culture, the measurement, and the accountability. For me, this is the magic triangle. It's just like, when you're at school or doing your science lesson, you have the fire triangle. To create a fire, you need the fuel, you need ignition, and you needed oxygen. If you took one of those elements away, you didn't get fire. And that's exactly the same with cybersecurity. We need culture, we need measurement, and we need accountability. If we can be successful in those three elements, we're winning. So the enablement of simplicity, for me, if we strip this right back, is really, really simple. Understand your current level, your current operating model. What's the level of maturity for KPIs, protection level agreements, risk by business function, by accountability? What is the culture? So be honest with yourself, quickly map it out on your Wardley map as the example I've shown. Step 2 now is, now we know where we are, we need a direction, we need a strategy. A direction and strategy is underpinned by goals, visions, objective, and mission. Once we have this, we have the foundations. We can start addressing the business model, the processes, the business value. Then we start measuring this, the KPI. So I'm not measuring it at a technical level, I'm measuring it at an effectiveness level. And then from here, we can start change, start making things habit forming. And then we continually evolve this. It becomes evolution. But the key thing here is, don't do this across the whole organization straight away. Pick one business function, preferably the function with the biggest risk. And by doing this, we start simplifying the approach to cybersecurity. So today's session was about simplicity. So we're only going to focus now and drill down into the simplicity foundations of removing the fear of cybersecurity. We're going to talk about the direction and the strategy which underpins the whole success of executing against an effective cybersecurity target operating model. We need that North Star. Remember that successful business I spoke about, which hopefully you were involved with. They had a North Star. Everyone knew what direction they were pointing in. In addition to that, they had a really good culture, hence the success of the organization. So we need to give your business, your organization, a strategy, a mission, a North Star for cybersecurity. Because as I've already said, cybersecurity is so freaking unique. It's so different to any other business function. So we need to ensure everyone's aligned and pointing in the same direction. So we create a purpose. The purpose is underpinned by 4 objectives. We're going to assess, we're going to detect, we're going to respond, and we're going to automate. Those initiatives, objectives, drive outcomes. This is a sample that you can use for your organization. It's a one-slide strategy. Feel free to adapt it, edit it, change it to your appropriate organization. You may have a cybersecurity policy. How many people actually read it? This is a clear strategy that everyone in the organization can get behind and point in the same direction. It starts the fundamental stage of a positive cybersecurity culture. It's about defensibility and making sure everyone is in that same direction. More importantly, your board members will understand this. Your techies will understand it. Your HR team will understand this. Now we have our strategy, our North Star. Where do we start? As I previously stated, this part 1 series on simplicity, we need to identify a business function. Please don't start by spraying this across the whole organization. So very quickly on one slide, impact versus value. Map out the business functions. You can also add the data types to what you have in your organization to this. And the scenario goes like this. If you were to receive a phone call from me tomorrow, and I said, "Hi there, this is Jason. I'm sorry to have to have called you, but I'm informing you that your organization has been compromised." Immediately, what business function would you go, OMG, did the bad actors get access to that business function? First question, can you actually answer that? And 2, whatever your answer is, write it down. Go and run the same scenario to 3 other stakeholders in your organization. See if you get the same answer. My gut would tell me you won't. So you need collectively to agree what that biggest business function would be and the impact would be. And that's where you start. We reduce the scope, focus on business function first of all. That would give you the biggest impact. Because today, I guarantee you, you're just spraying security everywhere. You've got a vanilla level of security across the whole organization. That vanilla level of security is not equal to the actual, the potential exposure or impact. So North Star, where to start, aka scope. And the other really simple thing I want you to do, see if you have a RACI in your organization. What is the RACI? Do you have actually races? Do you clearly document, explain, show who is responsible and who is accountable for different elements of cybersecurity? So I've taken an example here for vulnerability management. It could be threat intelligence. It could be managed detection and response. It could be access control. It could be phishing simulation. All of these different domains for cybersecurity Have you clearly created a RACI on who's accountable, responsible, supportive, informed, and consulted? Again, very few organizations I speak to around the world can clearly show me a RACI for different elements of cybersecurity. So today's session really has been about some very simple principles, elements to start this journey. We spoke about the culture. We've spoken about the direction, the North Star, the strategy. We've spoken about ownership. Do you have this in place to date? Yes or no? Because if you're saying no to any of these, maybe we need to consider a different approach. I want to take you on a journey. I've been now roughly 10 months around the world talking about the concept of operationalizing cybersecurity. I've yet to come across a CISO, CIO, a CTO, or a board member who agrees with what I'm talking about here. Cybersecurity is very new. And we don't need to repeat what the world has already created or using in other industries. So we just need to step back. We need to look at what we're doing, look at the effectiveness. And gradually, over a period of time, we evolve. Most organizations that I see with regards to the operating model are nascent or risk-informed. But over time, zooming out, we can go to repeatable to adaptive. It's all about a journey. And I think as anyone in the security industry, we have to evolve. And as I've already said, as leaders in cybersecurity or anyone responsible for cybersecurity, we need to stop being the no guys, and we need to form a position of leadership, transformation. Because as this industry evolves, and it's, it will continually evolve, it will get more complex if we let it. We need to treat cybersecurity like what I call profit and loss, financial profit and loss. Now, let me give you an example. If I was to go into one of your businesses tomorrow, sit down with the board and say, by the way, board members, stakeholders, I have data, I have evidence to show that the EBIT dial for your organization is going to go negative in Q3. I presented the data to them. They looked at that data and they went, I agree, Jason. How would they act? What would they do? I know what they would do. Immediately, they would adjust various levers in the organization to start reducing operating costs, reducing T&E, reducing expenses, reducing the marketing budget or other budgets to control the profitability to ensure the EBIT dial doesn't go negative. So why don't we do that for cybersecurity? We have to treat cybersecurity like financial profit and loss. We need to present as security leaders, as stakeholders to the business, the appropriate data in a way that they can understand. It needs to be contextualized. One risk in your organization may not be a risk in a different environment. For an example now, a lot of people are moving to the cloud. Security vulnerability in the internal network infrastructure may be present in the cloud environment, but irrelevant. There's no way, as the world evolves, we're going to be able to mitigate every single vulnerability or risk that's present. So with the appropriate operating model, the simplicity that I'm talking about, we can start contextualizing what's relevant to us or your business in context. So this is my concept of the evolution of profit and loss for the cybersecurity industry. But it's down to us as leaders, as stakeholders, to take the business on this journey. If you want to execute or consider approaching your target operating model and talk about simplicity, Rapid7 have a world-leading platform that can solve a lot of these issues, take the complexity, translate it into business conversations. Please take a look and see what you think. We can assess, detect, respond, and automate all of the challenges, all of the pains around identifying risks, identifying threats, and undertaking remediation. So what's next? If I haven't bored you during this part 1 series, we have 2 more sessions coming up. We're going to build on this part 1 session, simplicity, in part 2, and we're going to start talking about the foundations to quickly adapt and remove the stress and generate and execute effectiveness in your organization. Then we're going to start in part 3 talking about the tranquility. How do we get the effect? How can we solve these problems? How can we just make it normal? And how can we start investing in the future to start reducing the operating cost of cybersecurity, but at the same time, reducing the risk? Because it can be done. I've done it with organizations around the world within 6 months following this model. But it's all about a journey. It's all about baby steps. We need to zoom out sometimes as opposed to zooming into the technology. I know we all love technology, but the technology needs a business model, it needs business requirements, and it needs business processes for us to maximize the value of it. So there's a QR code here. If you point your camera, if you're just listening to me in the background, that will take you to the registration pages for part 2 and part 3. And I hope you can join me there. Also, during part 2, we'll answer any questions that you've had in part 1. More importantly, I've spoken about a lot of content in this session. And as I've already said, I want to take this journey with you and consistently getting positive feedback from around the world. So you will be receiving a number of follow-up emails and an email pointing you to relevant documentation, blueprints, content, KPIs, protection level agreements. I want you to be successful. I want to solve this challenge and this problem that this world has to date. I want you to operationalize cybersecurity. I want you to get the effectiveness. This is very simple, hence the title, Simplicity. More importantly, I'm not just a face. I'm not just someone talking to you. We have a number of up-and-coming executive roundtables. These roundtables are to do maybe a 1-to-1 or 1 to 4 or 5 people having a workshop with me as a roundtable where we can get into the meat and we can make you successful. There's no cost for this. You will be receiving an invite. If you want to join one of these personal, in-person roundtables with me, I would love to see you there and I welcome you joining me. Also, you will be receiving another invite from myself to join us during what we call Cybersecurity Wednesday. So again, it's a very small group. You'll receive some wine. We can talk about the challenges and the problems. Spaces are limited, but simply save your seat. You will receive an invite. And again, another opportunity for us to get into some of the detail and talk about maybe some of the finer detail challenges that you have. And I can share my experiences with you, and also other individuals can share with you as well. So just to show that I'm not just making all this up, I can share with you hundreds of positive feedbacks about these roundtables, these sessions, other Bright Talks that I've been delivering, and you will receive those links. This is something that's very rarely spoken about in the industry. And we need to start talking about this. Technology is one thing, but unless we're operationalizing, making the security part of the business process to ensure we're reducing that operational cost and reducing risk, this problem isn't going to go away. My objective is to make you safe, but to make cybersecurity simple so every single individual understands in an organization, from the board member through to the technology, the techie, understands why, what effectiveness and what good looks like. We cannot do it in isolation. Remember what I said, this industry, cybersecurity, is a very new industry, and we need to evolve and we need to move quickly. So I'm very grateful for you joining me today. And what's really important is I want feedback. If you feel I'm talking rubbish, tell me. If you think this is valuable, tell me. If you want to hear more about a particular subject or element that I've spoken about, please tell me. But I need your feedback. I need your feedback to make these sessions more interactive or talk about other things which are relevant to yourself. So at the end of today's Bright Talk session, before you switch off and leave me from talking to you, you will be asked to rate or provide feedback. I would be very grateful if you could provide that feedback for me, please. Because in turn, I can improve, I can learn. And isn't that what all of this is about? All of us to learn together. And finally, huge thank you. Thank you for taking 45 minutes of your time out today. I know you're extremely busy. I hope this content was of use. I look forward to hearing from you at some point, or some feedback, or you joining me in one of the round tables. If you want to reach out to me, here's the many ways you can reach out to me. And once again, I'm very grateful for you joining me today. And I hope to see you on part 2 and part 3 of removing the fears around cybersecurity. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of Confronting Security Fears to Control Cyber Risks. So since part 1, I've been overwhelmed by the number of inbound requests to have one-on-ones, people asking some amazing questions, which I hope to answer today. So for everyone who didn't join me during part 1, you can go and actually watch this on replay right now. But also, I would suggest that you register for part 3 as well. So today, the objective is we're going to talk about how we execute, how we start challenging the unexpected, how we embrace, how we execute cybersecurity to operationalize within your business. But before we start, a couple of reminders. Today's session is being recorded, so you can come back and watch it at any point in time, or pass the link on to other colleagues within your organization. But more importantly for me is, I want you to ask questions. I want you to provide feedback during this session. So the feedback that I had during part 1 was immense. I'm going to try and answer as many of those questions that I had during part 1 in today's session. In addition to that, in the section within the platform, you can see there's content. I'm going to be sharing content with you today, KPI documents, protection level agreements, and copies of today's presentation will be available for download. But please, during this whole session, any question, any feedback, I would be very grateful to receive that, because then we can use that in part 3. So regarding today's session, we're going to do a quick recap on part 1. So for anyone that's joining me for the first time today, I'm actually just going to give you a very quick snapshot of what we covered. Then we're going to kind of get right into it. And we're going to be kind of getting into the core principles of executing effectiveness, overcoming the challenges that we covered in part 1. And then really towards the end of today's session, we're going to touch on accountability. As security professionals, we have an element of accountability, but how do we express and how do we get other individuals in the organization to buy into that accountability? And that's all about a journey, which we're going to touch on. So again, the session has been recorded. You can come back at any time, use any of the content that I'm reusing within your organization, but also share this within your organization. And please, finally, questions. The explosion and the feedback from part 1 has been phenomenal. I want this for today's session, part 2. So let's just touch on part 1. At the highest level, at 50,000 foot, we spoke about the pains of trying to execute and operationalize cybersecurity within an organization of all sizes. We spoke about alignment of ownership and the accountability problems. We spoke about where to start, where to focus. Most organizations just start spraying security everywhere. Having that approach, actually, you do not get any effectiveness. But for me, it comes down to translation. As an industry, we've been very good at making cybersecurity very complicated, and also a conception that you need to spend immense amount of money to secure your organization. We need to retrain, retranslate that message to the organization to get buy-in and to get execution, which in turn, I call them my pain relievers. We need to talk about culture. How do we enable a better culture? But before we talk about culture, we need measurement. And really today, it's all about measurement, the execution, and the direction of an organization. If we can get an organization bought into the measurement, and that's translated in the appropriate way, we can start guiding people in a particular direction. Remember in part one, we spoke about the North Star. So once we have direction, measurement, naturally we will get culture. And today it's about the doing. How do we start executing against the culture, the measurement, and the direction for an organization? But before we start, there was one or two questions which I had from part one, and they were repeating questions. And honestly, I was blown away by the number of positive responses, the feedback, but some of the questions were phenomenal. So we're actually going to attempt to answer some of these questions today in this part two session. So one of the really enlightening questions, and thank you so much to the individual, you know who you are, who sent this, was, so Jason, how do I measure profit in cybersecurity without getting too theoretical? And interestingly, without getting into artificial intelligence conversations, etc., or what if scenarios. So I kind of come up with a number of possible approaches, which I've used in previous lives and also advising boards within organizations on how to do that. So really, I'm not going to go through each of them, but it's very, very simple. You can cost savings from an incident or preventing an incident from occurring is a very good one. Revenue protection, i.e. if you require to show accountability and due care to a third-party supplier that you're doing security or operationalizing security, you're protecting the revenue, or customer acquisition and retention, or compliance requirements. But you could argue there are elements of theoretical approaches around there. So what I tried to do here is create a number of very simple formulas that you can do to quickly calculate the profit in cybersecurity. And for me, it's all about operational efficiencies. So output divided by input times by 100 basically provides the output achieved. I won't bore you in reading this verbatim. Come back to it, look at these formulas, and include these within some of the journey approach that I'm going to talk about in due course. But the key thing, profitability in cybersecurity is very achievable, but it's about the right message, the right direction, translating this very complicated industry into a way that your audience understands. Some other questions that jumped out to me as well, which we will answer today. How do you get your exec team on board? We're going to cover this today. Not only are we going to cover it, we're going to actually execute and show you how to do it. The other one was, from your experience, what is the average situation of companies' maturity nowadays? Now, for me, this is a really, really great question. Maturity is, most organizations have the relevant technology. However, is the effectiveness of that technology, which gives me a sense of sadness because they're not actually getting the effectiveness. And they're not getting the effectiveness, not because of the technology, is they haven't taken the wider organization on a journey and using the data in the appropriate way. And then the other one that really jumped out to me was, how do you motivate a company to apply cybersecurity? And that came up a number of times. So hopefully in today's session, with all these other questions I haven't read out and all the other 100+ questions I received, we're going to answer some of these today. But keep the questions coming in. I will either come back to you directly in person or we'll cover them in the follow-up session. So I'm really grateful for you submitting the questions. So let's start. So during part one, we spoke about some of the challenges, the problems, the increase in spend year on year for cybersecurity, but nothing changing. And based on a lot of the feedback I had from you from the last session, I took the opportunity just to map this out, a journey map. So what I quickly created here was a positive experience and the pain points. Now, I suggest you start considering this for your organization, because this is a really, really good way to translate the challenges, the pain you may be having in your organization. But this is a typical journey that I see in most, probably 90 to 95% of organizations, irrespective of their industry or region of where they're based. So let's quickly go through this. So we get this amazing positive experience where we get this year-on-year increase in budget for cybersecurity. So there's, yay, we've got more budget. Cybersecurity team are happy, great. Then suddenly we get this dip of negative where we actually get lack of alignment between business functions. So remember, we spoke about this in part one. You've got this island of cybersecurity. For cybersecurity to be really successful, to execute, to create value in an organization, they're reliant on other business functions to remediate, to support. So this is the concept of decentralized security we spoke about. But we get this negativity because we don't have the alignment. And because we don't have alignment, ownership and accountability is a cause and effect of that lack of alignment. Then suddenly, from a security team perspective, we get insight to some new risks and we get some new insights to new threats. The security team try taking the organization on a journey, maybe a bit of remediation. Then suddenly we get no clear scope across the organization of potential impacts or threats or risk. So remember what I spoke about a minute ago. We're just spraying this vanilla level of security across the whole organization with not actually understanding the greater impact. Everyone's moving into the cloud, a cloud environment versus an internal environment versus a third-party supplier. They have all different levels of impact, and we need to consider this. And then we get this big giant of a problem that we're trying to solve collectively during these sessions that we're having with yourselves is, how do you track and relate the effectiveness of what the security team are doing? Again, that's come up in the number of the questions. That's the ROI, the profit and loss of cybersecurity. We may get there some ad hoc risk and threat mitigation. We get a new threat or risk occurs again. Potentially we buy new technology, the technology is implemented and security effectiveness hasn't changed. And I call this the wheel or the journey of hurt and pain and the life cycle of cybersecurity. And actually, if we look at those black dots, they're very trivial to solve. And that's what we're going to solve today. I'm going to walk you through an approach. I'm going to walk you through a model to start turning those pain points into positive experiences. And it's all about a journey. This isn't going to happen in 6 weeks, 1 month. This is a journey that potentially could take up to 36 months. So this is a very, very good way of representing your journey of pain for cybersecurity throughout your organization. Again, you can change these headings slightly, but give it a go. And more importantly, present it to stakeholders and see the reaction and consider the response you get back from them. So in part one, we spoke a bit about scope, the importance of scope, the level of risk, and translating that. Today, we're going to talk about protection level agreements. I touched on them previously, but we're going to get into the weeds. We'll get into how we execute protection level agreements to start changing the negative responses into positive responses within your organization. From there, we're going to start talking about the journey. How do we start communicating protection level agreements to bring the wider organization on a journey and stakeholders without getting technical? Remember, a protection level agreement is a way of facilitating communication, collaboration across an organization. Then we're going to talk about accountability. If we don't have accountability within an organization for cybersecurity, we're going to fail. So we need to take an organization on a journey of accountability. And we're going to break that down into some detail and start addressing how we can bring people on the journey and to start making them accountable for requirements or actions which are required to start making your organization more secure. But more importantly, this is about making cybersecurity part of the business process. From there, we're going to move on to measurement. So we need to start measuring change, measuring progress, and we're going to use KPIs to undertake this. So we're going to talk briefly about KPIs, using KPIs to make people accountable, which then feeds into the journey, aka protection level agreements. And then we're going to report about this and we're going to repeat. So the cycle we're going through is very simple. This is a journey over time. We start with the scope, the level of risk, the translation, the protection level agreements, into the journey, accountability, measurement, and we're going to report and repeat, and the process continues. And for this session, it's the execution of each of these elements. So, protection level agreements. There are a number of challenges within an organization of making cybersecurity effectiveness, the ability to make cybersecurity part of the business process. The challenges are very, very simple. Communication issues, for me, is the biggest one. As an industry, we've done amazing at making our industry very, very complicated. Different acronyms, different phrases, very technical language. For certain personas, that works. But as a common language throughout an organization, it doesn't work and it doesn't repeat. So we're going to start bringing some common languages into this model to overcome the communication challenge. The second one is misunderstanding as well. Remember, cybersecurity is so freaking unique. It touches every single part of an organization. It also needs to be considered in most business functions. So there's a lot of misunderstanding of bringing different functions, different people on a journey. And then also the level of skill required. We assume we need very technical individuals or very individuals with specific domain knowledge for cybersecurity. Personally, I disagree with that. In certain businesses, certain verticals, 100%, certain domains of cybersecurity. But cybersecurity can be consumed, implemented, and managed by most individuals if they understand the what, the how, and the why. So if we address these challenges, we have this great opportunity. The opportunity is really simple. Cybersecurity effectiveness management. It's a very, very, very powerful tool. Think about profit and loss, the ability to adjust a cash flow to make the organization more profitable or negative, loss leaders. And then over time, you get your gross and you get your net margins. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve here for cybersecurity. And then finally, it's about realization of impact. Businesses nowadays cannot solve every single threat, every single risk that their organization faces. So we need to focus, orientate the organization based on context. We can only get context if we can clearly communicate and take people on a journey and remove the misunderstandings. And this is what protection level agreements do. A protection level agreement is an agreement between two or more parties. where one is the business, the stakeholders, and the others are what I call the protection providers. Now, protection level agreements can be pushed across the whole organization. It facilitates communication. It's a mutually negotiated agreement. It defines procedures, but more importantly, it translates our industry, very complicated, very technical terms, into non-technical business language, which everyone can focus, align to, aka the North Star. So it's very, very simple. A protection level agreement in its simplest form is a form of SLA. But we've just taken the S off and we've put a P on and called it a protection level agreement. And it's the translator and the glue that brings all of this journey, all of this model together. So the first thing that we need to do is we've created a scope. So the objective from now on, following part one, remember, we need to focus on a business function first of all. Remember that oh-poo moment that I spoke about, and excuse the language for anyone who's listening. I need to, for you very quickly, if you haven't already done this and just joining part two for the first time, is in the event you were to get a phone call from myself or from one of my colleagues, and they were to say, I'm really sorry, but you've been compromised. The hackers have targeted you, unfortunately. What business function would you immediately go, oh, poo? Did they compromise? Did they get access to that business function? So as part of this whole model, we decide on the biggest impact business function. That's your scope. For that particular scope, that business function you've identified to be the biggest impact risk, we now need to define the protection level agreements, the PLAs, for that business function. And what we have here is a very, very quick probability and impact. And I've kind of done a lot of the hard work for you. All I need you now is to, from your perspective, is the thresholds. So on the far right-hand side, we've got PLA, protection level agreement. So what we're saying is, for probability from 81 to 100% with a significant impact, the threshold for the protection level agreement is 24 hours. Now, the scenario that I'm using here, and sorry, I should have put it on the slide here, the protection level agreements set out here are for vulnerability management. But you can actually create protection level agreements for vulnerability management, threat intelligence, cloud vulnerabilities, application security, phishing simulation, security training, etc. So you can apply and create protection level agreements specific to the domain of the control or the implementation that you're addressing. So just to kind of reaffirm, this is a set of protection level agreements for vulnerability management. So what we're saying is, on a probability of 81 to 100% with a significant impact, we require remediation action within 24 hours. Or we can go to the other end, probability of 1 to 20% with an impact, a significant impact along the bottom, basically 180 days or lower, etc. But this is an example, but these are the thresholds for the protection level agreements. Hopefully that makes sense. Remember, the protection level agreement aligned to the scope that you've identified as that OMG moment. So now we've defined our protection level agreements. The protection level agreement, the simplest form, says, right, at an organizational perspective, the business has mandated, agreed that a critical vulnerability is going to be resolved in a set period of time. That's the protection level agreement. But in order for the protection level agreement to be executed, we need accountability. So in order to address accountability, we need to start considering ourselves in the InfoSec team or teams, the need and where are we with regards to accountability. So before we can start pushing accountability on other people, within the security team, what behaviors have we been traditionally aligned to for accountability? So we need to, before we start pushing those protection level agreements onto other individuals, we need to start thinking about that. And what I've created here is something called an accountability ladder. Make it happen, accepting things happen because of you and ensuring a way out. Is it the wait and hope? I can't wait. Personal excuses, blame others, acknowledge reality, embrace it, find solutions. So with this island of cybersecurity as an industry, I'm always looking at the security team and the culture around it. They're always blaming others that resolutions are not being made, vulnerabilities are not mitigated. But that may be for a reason. So I need you to consider how you manage, how your security team function around accountability. Are they blaming the business? If so, maybe there's a reason for that. Are you taking, or your team taking that bit of a business function on a particular journey? Do you find solutions? Hopefully today's session is the solution to start optimizing the level of behavior for accountability. Why have I put this slide there? Because I think we all need to be accountable. But before we can start embracing accountability from other teams, we need to understand where our moral compass is as an individual, or maybe your team functions are, because that may need a bit of a reset. And for me, taking the concept of an accountability ladder, when you start applying protection level agreements, don't expect everyone to go, hey, Jason, I buy into this. I'm going to double down on this and I'm going to commit to it immediately. It's a journey. And I've broken down the journey into really 4 stages of accountability. Stage 1, let's get individuals, other stakeholders, other business functions, understanding that things have to happen because of. And that because of is we're going to start using data, KPIs, and protection level agreements to take them on that journey. The second stage is understanding the root cause, making them clear. It's not the security team saying, oh, problem, red flag. It's about inherently technology has vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities are always going to be found. There's going to be 0 days. It's the nature of the world we live in. It's just like getting in the car in the morning. You get in the car, some people have an accident, unfortunately, some people don't. It just happens. It's a root cause effect, where your car might break down, or you might get a puncture. That's cybersecurity. This stuff just happens. Problems occur. So we need to embrace that, and we need to consider that change has to come. And then stage 3 is really understanding that actually now you've spoken to your stakeholders, they understand that things happen, like when they get in the car, they go to work. Unfortunately, they may get a puncture. They may be frustrated because they're late, but they accept it. They accept the root cause, and then ultimately they commit to changing the tire, and they just get on and do that. We need to take the same approach for cybersecurity. And stage 4 is, what I call kind of the highest level of maturity for accountability, is putting efforts to make things better, i.e. it becomes the normal, it becomes part of the business process. So don't expect day 1 by enabling protection level agreements, you're going to go kind of stage 4 immediately. Different personas, different individuals, different personalities are going to embrace the levels of accountability. Why I'm again showing this slide is to set expectation. It's a journey, and we've got to gradually take people up the ladder or down the ladder, and you're going to see different levels of maturity across different levels of stakeholders.
But the way you do this and it can accelerate it or decelerate it is how you present the information, how you translate this very technical stuff around vulnerabilities, because we're talking protection level agreements around vulnerabilities today, how you present it to them. The way you present it, the way you take them on a journey will dictate the acceleration or deceleration on the maturity, on the stages and levels of accountability. The key part to accountability is tying your protection level agreements to a RACI. So what I've done here, again, you'll all get copies of these slides as examples. So hopefully you can use some of these templates. Is within that scoped area that we've defined, there may be business functions. Or in this case, for the scoped area, for the protection level agreements, we've identified 3 business functions. For each business function, we've identified the environment, and then along the top, the personas. And what we've clearly done is then made them responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. Now, this becomes the RACI for your protection level agreement. So you can see what we're doing here. We've got the scope or the scoped area, aka the business function. We've created a set of protection level agreements around vulnerabilities. And now what we've done is we're communicating who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed relative to the mitigation, the ownership of the protection level agreement. Straight away, everyone's informed, everyone's pointing in the same direction. It's a very, very simple approach. It has massive effect. The scope, protection level agreement, the accountability underpinned by a RACI. Really simple. And what this starts doing, it starts breaking down barriers. So if people are not hitting the required protection level agreement that's been set, it doesn't become a conflict. It becomes a business conversation. It may mean that the business analyst or the SME doesn't have time for remediation in the particular AWS environment. So it becomes a business conversation. Okay, how do we increase capacity in the backlog to make sure in the event a critical vulnerability is identified in the backlog, we can remediate it in line with the protection level agreement threshold or requirement of 24 hours. So processes can be put in place, additional ownership or actions, you could class it as a potential incident. So it's an emergency response, we need to deal with it. But it facilitates the communication, and all personas, all stakeholders that are involved in that business function or that environment within the business function clearly understand what's expected and what is required. And over time, this becomes a repeatable process, becomes habit forming, and it becomes the norm. And it's not cybersecurity going problem, problem, problem. We're decentralizing the responsibility, the accountability, responsibility, the ownership, and making the appropriate people informed at the same time. So ultimately, we start pulling this whole model together. It's about a journey, protection level agreements, taking the audience on that particular journey, communicating to them in the right way, clearly calling out, spelling out what's required from an accountability, and then we get into what I call the measurements. In order to measure, we require KPIs. Now, I love KPIs. Apologies, I'm a bit of a geek. I love my data. But all of you today have the appropriate data to pull out and to create KPIs. Now, what we've done here at Rapid7, we've created these KPIs for you. And more importantly, we've created banks of KPIs aligned to part 1. So we spoke about culture, measurement, accountability, processes, and automation. So we've categorized a set of KPIs aligned to those core foundational elements of cybersecurity I spoke about in part 1. But what we do now, we use the KPIs to extract the technical data and detail, and then we use the KPIs to feed into the protection level agreements. But the key elements that I want to talk about regarding KPIs is, just like protection level agreements, we created a rating, and it's clearly defined who's accountable, who's responsible. But some of the biggest downfalls that I've seen when people have tried implementing security KPIs, they're not really tied to a category. They don't really have an owner. They don't really have a target. They don't really have a data source, and no one's accountable to the KPI. So again, we've done this hard work for you, and we've created a set of KPIs, or a bank of KPIs. Use the QR code here and you can download them immediately. But the KPIs are absolutely key. So from a vulnerability management, you can do, time to remediate, time to report, time to allocate resource. There's a whole bank of them. So protection level agreements are really the final stage of this operating model. So taking this approach, what does it do? It starts basically shifting the roles and responsibilities, skills and processes together in a controllable way. Part one, we spoke about, we have the business requirements, the technology and the process all misaligned. The protection level agreement is the glue that brings all of this together. It facilitates the communication. It facilitates the collaboration. It's a way of taking the organization on a journey in a very simple, non-technical way that drives effectiveness immediately. And for me, this is what I call the evolution of the profit and loss for cybersecurity. Protection level agreements allowed the organization to accept some risk, mitigate some risks, and contextualize what is required from a risk mitigation and the ability to drive cybersecurity effectiveness, culture, and the ability to make it part of the business process. This can all be underpinned and powered by a platform. You may already have a platform, but Rapid7 here, we underpinned cybersecurity effectiveness. We operationalize cybersecurity. A lot of the KPIs that we spoke about are pre-built into our technology, into our platform. You can pull those out and tie them straight into the protection level agreement. You may have another product. Again, the same model, the same approach applies. It's just all about taking the data, translating it into a business conversation. So hopefully that was of use. There's a lot of content there. Each of those slides I can talk for hours upon. Now, what I would love to offer you is we have a number of up and coming executive roundtables. Feel free to join me on any of these exec roundtables. I will be personally hosting them. They're very small, very niche, and we get into some more detail on how we execute bigger plans, templates, and blueprints. If you don't feel comfortable about joining one of those roundtables, I'm here personally. I've been very happy to join you on a personal one-to-one call. My details are at the end, or you can put it into the questions at the end of this session, or even now as we're talking. We have a Cybersecurity Wednesday. Again, I encourage you, if you want to get into the detail, talk more about your organization, the challenges you're having, I would be more than happy to help you overcome those challenges. Many people have joined these roundtables and had immense success in executing about some of these models that I'm talking about in operationalizing and driving cybersecurity effectiveness. And for me, cybersecurity can be really, really easy. On one hand, people are embracing the snow and how great it is. And on the other side, we're seeing businesses burning huge amounts of cost. The two can come together, but you've got to step back, break down barriers, ensure everyone's pointing in the same direction, use the protection level agreements to drive accountability, process, ownership, and use them to bind the whole organization together. And I may be oversimplifying this, but trust me, it works. It's very, very, very simple. But also we need to consider the accountability from ourselves. If you've got a security function that's not working, all you're doing is spending money, ask yourself, is it the business or is it how we're approaching this too? Or do we need to come together and work together? And that come together and that working together all can be facilitated by using protection level agreements to take the broader organization on a journey. So thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope part 2 was just as interesting and just as insightful and useful for you as part 1. Please rate today's presentation. More feedback is better because then I can adjust the content as I do more of these presentations for you. But more importantly, I can bring this into part 3. So rate today's session. Any questions, please ask, and I will get back to you directly or indirectly, or we'll answer them during part 3. If you've been sat there listening to me while you're working, I'm very grateful for you taking the time to join me today. And for people who've been actively watching all my hands moving around, again, I'm very, very grateful. So thank you so much. Again, more resources supporting this whole series. We've got the whole series around operationalizing cybersecurity. We've got target operating models. We've got the KPI documents. We've also got a very detailed document to support today's part 2 session on protection level agreements. So once again, thank you so much for joining me today. And it was lovely to meet you again. Thank you.
Hello and welcome everyone to this final episode of Confronting Security Fears to Control Cyber Risks. So a huge thank you to everyone who's joining me again and was so kind to join me during parts 1 and part 2. Very grateful for you joining me again today. For all the newcomers who are joining me for the first time for this final episode, I'm very grateful you could take the time and the opportunity to join me today, and hopefully the content will be enlightening. I just want to kind of touch on the response and the reaction to this series. This has been one of Rapid7's most successful Bright Talk series. We've had thousands of live viewings and also thousands of on-demand viewings, and the reaction and the response throughout the world and the community on what we're actually talking about, it's been mind-blowing. It seems to be touching a chord, and more importantly, the value that organizations, stakeholders, CISOs, heads of security and practitioners are actually getting out of this series is being fascinating. So during today's session, any questions, any concerns, any challenges, please submit them in the question toolbar on your far right-hand side looking at the screen. But more importantly, as we talk through this final episode today, if there's anything else you would like me to start considering to talk about with driving cybersecurity effectiveness, I would welcome your feedback. So what to expect from today? So obviously people who've already joined me in the past, we're going to kind of bring parts 1 and part 2 together. For people joining me for the first time, you're actually going to get a concise snapshot on how to drive effectiveness, how to drive change, and overcome the fear of executing and operationalizing cybersecurity in your organization. We're going to break today down very quickly into, first of all, we'll do a quick scene setting, slightly different approach, slightly different way of looking at things through a slightly different lens, roughly 5 minutes. Then we're going to kind of get straight into how do we start driving change outcomes within your organization, and how do we start effectively driving effectiveness and change across your organization. And then finally, we're just going to summarize on the key points. A couple of important facts. Again, if you're joining for the first time, please jump over at any point, watch the on-demand series. Also, what we're actually finding is a lot of individuals now are sharing the content and the pre-recorded on-demand content to other stakeholders in your organization. So feel free again to kind of share this with your organization to allow us to start affecting change. We've already spoken about questions. The reason I believe this content has been resonating so much is from your questions. The more questions, the more feedback, we can alter, we can adjust the content in the next series to make it more applicable to yourselves. So please, lots of questions. And then finally, I know we're all kind of working from home, or you may be working at your desk having a coffee, listening into me rambling, apologies. But at any point, you feel there's a question as you're listening in, please submit that question. I'll be very, very grateful. And hopefully for everyone who has already submitted questions, you've already received your response from me. And again, I'm here to be asked questions and challenged, and I will get back to you. So let's kick off. During parts 1, parts 2, we've kind of touched on the various challenges with actually driving cybersecurity effectiveness. And based on some of the feedback I've kind of had from yourselves during part 1, part 2, I thought, how can I visualize these challenges that people are submitting and talking about and feeding back? And for me, I'm going to kind of define this as what I call the diffusion of cybersecurity. People think in different ways. Different stakeholders think in different ways in your organization. CISOs think in different ways. I could have 2 CISOs and they may be looking at challenges and problems in a totally different way, with the core objective of how do I reduce risk. But we can only start reducing risk if we look at the business context. What are the needs and what are the challenges within the organization? What are the barriers? What are the enablers? Then we need to start looking at actually, what is the processes? Am I trying to implement change, risk mitigation, operationalizing cybersecurity, when actually as an organization, the processes that we have may not be suitable or may not be adaptable to drive that change? The big one for me is risk. My question for people joining for the first time today, if you were to receive a phone call from myself tomorrow and I said, hi there, I'm sorry to inform you, but your organization has been breached, which business function would you immediately think, did the threat actors get to that business function? Do you actually know what the impact is on different business functions? That's a question you can kind of continue thinking about. And we'll touch on that today and how to address that. And then finally, we've got the technology side of it. Great, amazing security technology around the world. Most of you will be consuming it in one form or another. But are you getting full utilization out of that? Are you only using 5% or 10% of the functionality? Is it giving you the full coverage? Has your practitioners had the appropriate skill to drive the effectiveness? So taking it back from a diffusion of cybersecurity, we have these 4 core compounded areas, which in their own right have challenges. And really, this is what this series has been about. How do we start breaking down these challenges? And more importantly, how do we start fusing these elements together to get them all to work in tandem to reduce the operational risk, increase effectiveness, and drive the operational cost of security down? And this all starts with what I call the alignment. From a board perspective, they have a set of requirements: the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, the project manager, the consultant, HR, human resources. Everyone has a different view, different perspective on cybersecurity. But more importantly, as we've already touched on in previous episodes, is do they actually understand what they're accountable and what they own? And this is the concept of operationalizing cybersecurity, clearly calling out an operating model that starts breaking down and bringing the alignment of the organization together. As an example, I spent most of my life around the world speaking to different types of stakeholders in different industries. And over the past 12 months, a common theme and challenge that I'm seeing at the board level is on an annual basis, we're increasing our budgets for cybersecurity. But as a board member, I'm not technical. How do I challenge my organization to understand the effectiveness of the spend that we're spending on cybersecurity? How do we do that? I'm struggling, Jason. Can you help me? I challenge you today. Go to your board, go to your stakeholders, and ask them the single question. How do we measure effectiveness from a board perspective? Because I can tell you now, if you're talking about P&L, cash flow, EBITDA, they would immediately know how to challenge the organization to ensure that the P&L is being maintained properly and there's accountability and auditability in a way they understand. So we need to start presenting, enabling upwards, providing them the right context, the right approach to allow a board to challenge the effectiveness of cybersecurity. If you're a CISO for the first time joining me today, lovely to meet you and thank you. But how many of you here today continue to struggle to make cybersecurity a part of the business process? You're continually asking for more cost, more budget, but actually it's not reducing your risk. This is a common challenge, a common theme I see through CISOs around the world. Or you could be a CISO after 2 years, you're struggling to take the organization you're working on a journey. Your ability to reduce the risk in that organization has come to a head. From your perspective, your exposure, your reputation is at risk because the business is not listening to you. So you decide to move to another organization where hopefully you can start taking that organization on a journey. This whole series has been about taking other people on the journey for cybersecurity. And maybe sometimes we need to challenge ourselves. Is it the business, or is it the combination of the business and ourselves conveying the appropriate message in a particular way for that organization or stakeholders above you to understand what you're trying to achieve? And actually a fascinating fact that, kind of resonated to me when I was actually, I think it was someone who attended one of the recent Bright Talks, I think it was part 1. They actually said to me that the average tenancy of a CISO is 18 months, which astounded me. Now, for me, that kind of shows 2 things. One, actually, they are struggling and there's an element of risk on themselves, so they want to move to a new role, or they've been offered a higher amount of money, one or the other. And then for me, finally, and again, this is yet another example, individuals responsible for a form of cybersecurity in a particular domain, in this particular case, vulnerability management. Your vulnerability management, or you may be running the vulnerability management practice today and listening, and thank you for joining, but you continue to report on the same risks, but struggle to have the business remediate these vulnerabilities. And it's a common challenge, a huge challenge. So you can see we've got these challenges in these silos across the organization. We've got a board issue, we've got a CISO issue, we've got a practitioner issue. So we need to change this. And ultimately today, we're going to break this down very quickly, very concisely on how we start overcoming these challenges very quickly. And those 4 examples that I just covered really encapsulate 4 common problems, which I've spoken about on previous Bright Talks, that we need to overcome and address. And I challenge everyone here today to do that. When you're starting something new, is cyber a part of it? What is the risk? What is the impact? What are you trying to achieve? Have you created that RACI? We've spoken RACIs and in great detail in previous episodes. Performance. How do you measure performance for cybersecurity? Seems to be a continual theme. Jason, how do I measure it? Do you have a formula? There's multiple ways we can do that, and we've covered this in previous episodes.
But for me, it's all about alignment. If we cannot create alignment, enable alignment, we have no hope in overcoming this fundamental problem we have in the industry. So it's all about alignment, taking different stakeholders on a journey. And then if we cannot get that alignment, we're going to fail at implementing against the strategy. These are the 4 big issues, and we're going to break them down now, bring parts 1, part 2 together on how we overcome these challenges very quickly. And it's all about what I call this concept of operationalizing cybersecurity, moving from your current operating model to a target operating model. I believe it was in part 1, or it could have been part 2, where we quickly identified what your current operating model is. We would very quickly map out some core foundational elements. We would understand the dynamics between the various components. And then from there, that would create the output for our target operating model. But we can only operationalize cybersecurity if we focus on other elements as well. And remember, in order for the current operating model to transition into a successful target operating model, we need to focus on that magic triangle I spoke about. We need to be able to measure. We use the measurement to drive culture, and then culture creates accountability. When I was younger, I used to go to the woods. I used to try building a fire. Very quickly realized you needed ignition, oxygen, and fuel. If you didn't have one of those elements, you did not get that fire. And that's exactly the same that applies here today. We need all 3 of those core elements. We need the culture, the measurement, and the accountability. For now, forget about the processes, the resources, the automation, and the strategy. But we just need to execute on those 3 core elements. And ultimately, by focusing on those 3 core elements, underpinned by the current operating model, we can start executing. And ultimately, this is all about alignment of business, technology, and cybersecurity in a way that everyone can understand and in sync. We need to fuse that diffusion. We need to start bringing these elements together. So in stage 1, we need to understand what are those challenges, those problems that we have. In stage 2, we start creating the target operating model. And then in stage 3, it's all about the execution. And ultimately, this is all underpinned by what I call the R factor. It's all about the readiness, the preparation, the results, using the results to drive remediation and responsiveness across the organization. So unless you have the R factor built into your operating model, you're not going to get effectiveness. And the readiness also allows you to be prepared, change things on a daily basis. You can use the results to drive return on investment. Again, another lovely message from a viewer who joined one of the sessions. He started implementing some of the basic protection level agreements. Already he's seen about 4% effectiveness on ROI within a month. So think about the operating model underpinned with the R factor, which is the readiness, the results, the responsiveness, and the remediation. And ultimately, this becomes a process in its own entity. So let's quickly go through the 12 steps to drive this immediate effectiveness, immediate change across your organization. Again, it doesn't matter where you are in your organization. You could be a CISO struggling to take the broader organization on a journey. You can use this wherever you are. If you're a practitioner, if you're a head of security, if you're a CISO, or if you're a board member. These are the levers that we use to manage upwards and across and to the left and to the right to start driving change across your organization. So let's step into it. But also, as you're listening in, any questions, please start submitting questions and we can cover those at the end of today's session. So step 1,
you need to understand your current operating model. What is currently the barrier? What is preventing you to reduce risk and operationalize cybersecurity? What is preventing you to drive the effectiveness? So what are those key dependencies? So in part one, I believe we did a Wardley map. It was a map, an X and a Y axis. We mapped the scope based on the evolution and then how visible it was. So step one, I need you to map out your current operating model. Once we've done that, it's a 2-minute process. We document the current operating model. You'll have a visual left over from that exercise. But then we need to start altering the change around that. So remember, in that same diagram or a separate sheet, I need you to do the same X and Y process for culture, measurement, and accountability. So now those are the two foundational elements. You've got a current operating model that clearly shows the level of evolution and visibility of your protection level agreements, your risk, your scope. Overlaid on top of that, we have the evolution and level of visibility of culture and measurement and accountability. Now, what we do in step 3 is we basically now need to define the scope. So remember, if you start applying this effectiveness program across the whole organization or enabling the R factor across your whole organization, it's not going to work. So remember, we created the heat map. We need to identify business functions by impact. So the simplest way is that oh dear moment. Sometimes I use that in a slightly different context, but we need to know in the event something was to occur, or you were to be a victim, or unfortunately were compromised, what business function would give you the biggest concern and impact? So that's the scope. So now we have the current operating model. Now we focus on one business function of scope. In order to start driving maturity against the current operating model aligned to the scope, guess what? We start using KPIs. So start this for 1 month. Start tracking very simple things. Again, the document will be at the end of here, or if you've already got it, we've created a bank of different KPIs. So if you've got deficiencies in your culture, in your measurement or your accountability, you use the KPIs to start measuring against that for 1 month. From there, you use that output to basically visualize the effectiveness within that scope to your organization. You can translate this technical world of cybersecurity into a business language to show the organization, look, in this in this particular scope of the organization or business function, we've been tracking the following KPIs. As you will see from the KPIs and from the data, actually we're not getting any effectiveness. However, business, I have a way of changing this. I would like to implement a concept of protection level agreements. So what we've done from step 1 to step 5, we've started the messaging to manage upwards. We're starting to show them context. We're starting to show them data. That data actually would translate, we're not getting the return on investment, and actually our cost for cybersecurity continues to increase, but our risk is not reducing. So straight away, you start getting an element of attention. The answer to overcome this is the implementation of a protection level agreement. Now, remember what a protection level agreement was? Can anyone remember on the call today? Right, let me remind you. A protection level agreement is a way to facilitate change throughout the organization. The protection level agreement is owned by the business, as high up in the organization as possible. Let's call it the board. An example protection level agreement would be in a particular business function, we require critical vulnerabilities to be mitigated within a set threshold. That's all that's measured.
The KPIs feed into protection level agreement. You use the protection level agreement within the organization with the board to show changes occurring. They will very quickly see that actually the protection level agreement threshold is not being met. Why isn't that happening? Very quickly, it will identify it's a business process or there's an accountability issue within the organization. By doing this, you start taking the organization on a journey. It starts moving from a current operating model to a target operating model to identify effectiveness. In addition to that, what we can start doing now is start automating the KPI data depending on your technology stack. This is where we start utilizing and maximizing the functionality within your tech stack to drive that. The KPI data is aligned by the core foundations. It feeds into your protection level agreement, which translates effectiveness, risk to stakeholders in your organization. Now, what I like doing next in step 9 is the enablement of the RACI. I love my races. Races for cybersecurity, unfortunately, are very rarely used. So now you have the data, now you have the protection level agreements, now you have a way of translating the challenge and the problem to stakeholders. Maybe you want to suggest to your stakeholders, could we implement a RACI now for the protection level agreements or even the KPIs? So by doing this, you gradually start assigning ownership and accountability to other parts of the organization. It's not security recommending it, it's the business. And then over time, we start driving this positive security culture, moving from a negative culture or a culture of people don't really understand it, don't understand actually how you measure effectiveness for cybersecurity. And then step 11, it's really simple. Once effect starts to take effect, you apply the same process all over again for a different business process, different business function. And this becomes a continual cycle. Now, what's really, really important to state here, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is a journey. This takes time. This takes patience. But if you stick with this process, with a bit of R factor, I can categorically tell you right now, change will happen immediately. But it's all about outcomes. It's all about effectiveness. It's all about taking your stakeholders and the wider organization on a journey. If you're someone who owns a particular domain of cybersecurity, you may be struggling to manage upwards or to get the attention of the head of, or even your CISO. The same process applies. If you own the cybersecurity function, but are struggling to get the broader organization on side, this works. But trust me, it's baby steps, habit forming, nudges, use the data, translate the data and protection level agreements, and start sharing that in a way that the broader organization will understand. And this is what I call the blocks of enablement of the R factor. So another way of visualizing this, these are the core blocks that you're going to need to execute against your target operating model. You can only start if you understand now and here. That's your current operating model. Obviously, your current operating model is not working. So let's establish why isn't it working? What are those elements, those foundations that we've spoken about are missing? Then we start actually in parallel to the technology stack and the security data, we need to start maturing those missing elements. From there, we start taking the appropriate data from your technology stack and we align that to a scope. Remember, different parts of your organization will have a different level of risk, different level of impact. So why don't we use the technology to define and categorize and tag the scope within your organization? Becomes very, very easy. Also, if you're a CISO, tell your practitioners to say, look, please can you start categorizing different instances of our infrastructure based on business function within your technology. So now we have the scope. We need to start basically taking the data into the scope, from the scope into the KPIs itself. Again, we've created a bank of KPIs we've spoken about in detail. if you've got various different levels of maturity from culture, measurement, accountability, etc., the KPIs will be there to help you bring the maturity across on those core domains. Once we've got the KPIs, we start applying accountability, which is simple races. Again, there's plenty of examples which I've provided already based on the races, which you can cut and paste or reuse. Then we get into the protection level agreement, which brings all this together. It translates this very low-level technical effectiveness issues, operational issues, risks into a way the business can understand. And ultimately, those 7 blocks create your strategy to drive change, to go from your current operating model to a target operating model within your organization. And what this is do, for me, this is what it's all about. You're reducing the operational cost for running and maintaining cybersecurity in your organization, but actually you maintain a constant flow of reduction in risk across your organization. And you're going to go through 3 phases of Horizon. Horizon 1, we need to operate and stabilize. That's our understanding our challenges and problems with our current operating model. Then from there, we can start basically creating Horizon 2, which is your target operating model. And then 3, it's about making it part of the business process, making it new. By doing this, your operational cost comes down, security becomes part of the business process, measurement through the whole organization is very simple and translated. And for me, it's all about a journey. Give it a go. Try it. If you don't try it, you will never know. What have you got to lose? The worst thing you may have to lose is actually you're implementing KPIs that you've never implemented before. But give it a go, try it, and see what happens. As I already said, this has been one of Rapid7's most successful Bright Talk series. The feedback I've had is phenomenal. Individuals, organization, just taking the elements of this and implementing it has made a huge success and change to their organization. So I challenge you, give it a go. If it doesn't work, send me a message and we'll try and figure a way of overcoming that challenge for you. And ultimately, if it doesn't work for you, you're going to end up with this data that you may never have had before. Would it be great to present an executive report in a business language that your organization could understand? All about effectiveness, risk, operational risk, to show the ROI. And ultimately, that's what we're doing here for you today. If you're a Rapid7 customer or looking at Rapid7 today, all of this can be underpinned by the Rapid7 platform. Your target operating model, moving to from a COM, the current operating model, can all be powered, all the data from Rapid7. If you're not a Rapid7 customer or considering to be a Rapid7 customer, it's not a problem. The same approach applies. For me, I just want people to get a return on investment, reduce risk, and remove this increase in cost and increase of risk at the same time. And I just want cybersecurity to be effective for your organization. And I want you to be successful within that organization as well. So I'm very grateful for you joining me today. I hope this has been of use. And just to kind of recap, the objective of this series has been, how do you develop a clear mission, a clear vision statement, a clear North Star for your organization, which drives a positive mindset for cybersecurity? It translates the technical elements of this really geeky industry into a way that we can have a business conversation. It drives effective communication in a clearly well-defined manner across your organization. It measures effectiveness by a simple approach called a protection level agreement underpinned with a KPI. And it's all about operationalizing cybersecurity to drive effectiveness and to reduce risk and to drive positive outcomes in your organization. And what I love about this, it doesn't cost money. It's just looking at the problem in a slightly different way. And it's all about investing in your future and the future of the organization. Because we cannot keep spending this huge amount of money on cybersecurity without seeing the results of effectiveness and making cybersecurity part of the business process. So I challenge you to consider these key points and challenges. And again, if you are having any of these problems, go back to part 1, part 2, or even just come straight to part 3 to listen, execute, and join me in this change that we have to do in our industry. So I'd like to see, I think I'm looking, there's quite a few questions that have been posted here. So if you don't mind hanging around for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, I'll try and answer as many as possible. But if you have to go, thank you so much for joining me. I'm very grateful. I need your feedback. So as more feedback you can provide, I will be very, very grateful. But let's start getting into some of these questions. The first question I've received is, what role does employee education and awareness play in mitigating cybersecurity risk? So what role does employee education and awareness play in mitigating risk? Great question. So in order to educate, we need to show people actually the problem or the challenge. So by using data in the appropriate way and translating that data for that audience immediately underpins a level of education. I see so many organizations say, well, you need to do that, you need to do that, or we have to change this, without the context. Provide the context then drives the outcomes which you require for you. Next question is using this with boards and stakeholders. Again, it works really, really well. And again, we need to start providing context to the business, to the board. And I call these the levers of effectiveness for cybersecurity. Just like the board would understand if EBITDA or cash flow was a problem, they would know the appropriate levers. So ultimately, we need to use this approach to provide the appropriate levers to drive change in the organization. So I'm looking at some live questions now, bear with me. So what we've got here, okay, I'm part of a startup company that goes through the process of becoming a global enterprise, but my biggest struggle is with startup culture. The culture is hindering our efforts of defining a RACI table. Must consider cybersecurity as a security department. How do you deal with the culture of a startup? Okay, so I think obviously culture is all about kind of fail fast, learn quick, or learn quick, fail fast, okay? Now, for me, there's two sides to this. Cybersecurity should actually just be part of what you do on a daily basis. Now, ultimately, what you need to do in that culture is show the impact and the challenge of not making cybersecurity part of that culture. So if you're using any forms of tooling of any kind, let's take vulnerability management, obviously you're going to discover issues. You need to translate that in a way to actually drive that culture and, more importantly, drive that protection level agreement. So just like the startup, you're going to be tracking the P&L, the finances, okay? Are you burning money really quick? You know, what's the throughput on features and functions for the new product? You need to take that same approach with cybersecurity. So Oscar, please reach out to me directly, and I would love to have a separate 20-minute session with you, and I can show you some ways of doing that very, very quickly from a startup perspective, okay? So reach out to myself or directly with the team, and I'll spend some time on how you can overcome that and point you in the right direction and give you the appropriate templates. Next question, Danny. Great hearing from you, Danny. Thank you. Right, the technology will do its job to the best of its ability and what it knows. But it can be circumvented, a reality. But I'm sorry, I'm just reading this, but no. Yes, so so you're talking about outcomes and proactive monitoring detection. So again, you could have your monitor, you can have your IDR, your detection, your MDR places in place. But what I see is people are not getting the effectiveness because of the underlying operating model. So ultimately, Danny, all about races. Focus on the RACI, who's accountable and who owns certain elements and who's responsible, okay? So again, in part one, we had some really good RACI templates, but really it's about the RACI, okay? But more importantly, what you're trying to say here is the technology is doing one thing, but it can be circumvented. But actually, you might want to create some controls or protection level agreements around that to measure it, to show those issues. Again, same applies to you, Danny. I may not have answered your question 100% there because I'm kind of reading as I'm trying to present as well. But I think I know what your challenge is. Hopefully, I've answered it with a RACI. Again, reach out directly to me, okay? So look, I'm really conscious of timing, but finally, all of the content from today and the previous sessions are going to be available to record. Please pass them on to other stakeholders within your organization. There's links here. We've got the protection level agreements. We've got the KPI bank. We've got other webinar series on actually getting into kind of target operating models, etc. Please share it. Please use it. But for me, I need feedback from you. Was this good? Was it bad? I need to know. What would you like to hear more of? So for me, I'm running this like a startup, yeah, MVP. Tell me what you would like me to talk about next with regards to operationalizing cybersecurity or effectiveness. And from there, we'll create the content and we'll present back, guide you and help you. But once again, I'm very, very grateful for joining me once again. Thank you for everyone who's joined me for the first time. I'm really, really grateful. And I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you.